Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Kapansky, and thanks for joining us for today's best practice webinar. Today, we'll be discussing from data to decisions with Simplicity Ops and Wealthbox. Before we do get started, a couple of housekeeping items I wanted to make sure that we go throughout today's presentation. If you do have any questions, feel free to type those in. Down at the bottom, there's a Q&A button. You click that button, type in your question, and at the very end, we'll be able to address those questions for you. Also, keep in mind, as Kate had just said, this presentation is being recorded, so you will have the opportunity to rewatch or share the video with your colleagues in the future. You'll automatically receive an email in a couple of days, and you can always find it over on wealthbox.com under the resources section once it's been processed. So let's move on to some quick introductions. The host for today will, of course, be myself representing Wealthbox. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Chris Kapansky. I'm the head of customer education here at Wealthbox. I've been with Wealthbox for just about 10 years in about a week or so. But in that time, working with thousands of firms, helping them get set up with Wealthbox and ensure that they get the most out of their CRM. And if this is the first time you're hearing of Wealthbox, Wealthbox is the #1 rated CRM for financial advisors, known for its ease of use and high adoption. If you would like to see why so many advisors love Wealthbox, you can head over to wealthbox.com, click on book a demo to learn more. I also have the pleasure of being joined by Kate Guillen, founder and lead coach over at Simplicity Ops. Kate, can you introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about Simplicity Ops for anyone that might not be familiar?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, as Chris said, thank you guys for having me. First of all, I am the founder of Simplicity Ops. And Simplicity Ops is an operations management company, and we partner with Wealthbox users to build out what I like to call a client-focused operating system that is heavily focused around optimizing Wealthbox and integrating some other very key pieces of technology to help you grow and scale your business by delivering an exceptional customer service experience.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining. And with these best practice webinars, we really get right into it with a subject matter expert. So really excited that you are here with me as the subject matter expert, someone that works with advisors on a regular basis. So again, for anyone that's not joined one of these best practice webinars in the past, we go screens off. We just have a conversation about this topic, about these different things. So let's go ahead and kick it right off. I always like to start at the very top. So Kate, with you being the subject matter expert, let's kind of define what we're talking about here. What do we mean to turn CRM data into decisions from the perspective of an advisory firm?
I love this topic today. So yeah, I think there's a lot of firms that think they're doing really well, but there's oftentimes a gap when we get under the hood and look in their CRM. They have data, but turning that data and using it to actually make decisions to guide how they run their day to day takes a little bit of effort. And so I'm excited to have this conversation today and dig into this a little bit deeper. But the way I think about it is like, instead of just storing the data in your CRM, I want to use it to make decisions, like elevating the tool out of just being a client management tool to a business management tool. Where are we overloaded? Who's at capacity? Where are we at in our sales pipeline? How do we measure, some key performance indicators around the overall health and wellness of our business, like revenue per client, revenue per advisor, revenue per employee, to help use that data to drive the decisions that are actually going to move the needle within our business.
Yeah, certainly. That definitely does make sense. So, but let's keep expanding on that. So, why should Wealthbox or your CRM in general be viewed as that decision-making engine, not just a database?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the way I think about it is the database tells you what has happened. A decision-making engine helps you understand what's happening right now and what to do next. And so when Wealthbox is set up really well, it's more than just a data center for like holding information. It actually shows you, how work is flowing through the team, who owns what, where are things kind of like hung up or bottlenecked? Why is there slowness? Why did we get beat to the punch? Why is a client having to reach out? Why do we feel reactive? And that visibility really allows the leadership to step in early before smaller issues turns into larger fires.
Sure. Yeah. And so what's the end goal there? How can operational metrics and reporting drive smarter and more strategic firm management?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I find Well, I mean, just in my own experience, honestly, that when you have metrics and that level of clarity, it really changes the way that you lead. And so, what I mean by that is like, until you have data, we make a lot of decisions based on emotion and how we're feeling. Um, and that works for a while until it doesn't. And what I have figured out is once you start tracking these various metrics in your CRM, you can actually see patterns and adjust things really quickly before they turn, snowball into larger issues. And so the key is really just like focusing on small sets of meaningful metrics first. Um, like work in progress, turnaround times, setting very clear standards, measuring capacity across the team. So that when you start tracking those things consistently, you're able to move from like a reactive management to proactive management, which in my experience, is really where firms start to scale. And that proactive client service experience is really the client service experience that your clients tell their friends about, which is the whole point, right?
Yeah, definitely. And seek out gaps, right? Anywhere where
Absolutely.
there might be gaps. So now pivoting into your specific experience, being the lead coach and founder of Simplicity Ops, you work with a lot of firms that are wanting to fix some of these kind of uh I would say limitations in the way that they run their business. So from that perspective, someone with all having all these conversations, what where do you find there to be a pattern in where firms might struggle to translate that CRM data into actionable insights?
Yeah, I it's a great question. And most consistently, it's not the data. The data lives in the CRM. They're collecting good data. It just lacks structure. And so I know you mentioned this at the beginning of the call, and I'll get back to answering your question in a second. But as a follow-up to this conversation today, I will send everybody a follow-up email with some of the resources that I'm going to reference. But we've put together like a self audit, a self assessment to gauge where your CRM is at and understand where some of those gaps are, because most commonly it's the data is inconsistent. The way you put it in, Chris, is different than the way I put it in. And so then we go to run reports, it's inconsistent, right? Which creates a whole headache and mistrust in the system. Workflows, aren't clearly defined. There's no real clear role delineation, little too much overlap. So I'm having to like ping you when it's your turn, you ping me when it's my turn, or it's like nose goes, you're on it. There's no organization as it relates to like
Yeah.
the fluidity of the workflow, which causes a lot of frustration. Um, and that there's no, if there's inconsistency in the data, I kind of hinted at this, there's no standard way to interpret the data, right? And so what I find is that when you have those gaps, it really creates a mistrust in the system, and it really stems from the foundational like data component of the entire operating system. So, even though the information exists, it's not necessarily reliable. And if the data isn't reliable, why would anybody buy into the workflow or any of the other, bells and whistles that we're trying to incorporate when like at the foundational level, it's not trustworthy?
Sure. Yeah, and that definitely does make sense. Having all those different struggles. Let's continue expanding on that. How do some of these struggles, these hidden bottlenecks, unclear capacity, lack of visibility, how does that actually impact growth and client experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is really where it starts to show up. If you can't see the bottlenecks or the capacity clearly, you end up with work sitting longer than it should. I don't know about you, but like nothing irritates me more than being beat to the punch. So when you tell a client like, hey, yeah, no problem, I'll send you the 10 grand before the end of the week or whatever. And then you're like, oh shoot, there's no cash available. I got to free up some cash. And then the end of the week comes and the client's like, yo, where's my money? And you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you that I had to free up cash. And now it's going to be delayed by a couple of days. Like that starts to erode the trust in the relationship. You need to be proactive in that communication. And so when that stagnates, it really starts to diminish the client service experience. And this is where teams really start to feel overwhelmed and underutilized. And those delays that the clients feel just have a really negative, lasting impact, not just like externally with the client, but internally with the team. And I find that like the real challenge is that the leadership often doesn't see it until it's already affecting the client. And so um, it's the way I think about it is like it's not good enough to just like build the system. There actually has to be an ongoing audit and maintenance component in keeping up the database to ensure things are continue to be fluid and that there are no bottlenecks or any hangups that could potentially affect the client experience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I know that that's one of the first things that firms would attempt to do is build out those workflows and make sure that
Right.
they have that consistency in how they're reaching out. But then there's another kind of level of challenges that might arise. So I wanted to kind of ask you about this additional layer of what some of those challenges might be that come up when teams lack clear ownership or insight into
Mhm.
those workflows and the performance, whether we're actually completing them, right? That's always a big question. You even kind of pointed that out earlier of adopting some of these workflows and making sure that we're using them. But what are some of those additional challenges that might come up when, okay, we've got the workflows, we have it, but someone's going to take care of it. We're not sure who, we don't know if they are. What are some of those challenges?
Yeah, well, you nailed it. It's ownership, right? So if there's not clear ownership, that's when work slows down every single time. That's when tasks have to bounce back and forth. There's unnecessary external communication. There's missed handoffs. There's bottlenecks. There's just breakdown in the communication. It's like, oh, shoot, Chris, I thought you had it, you know? So the key to an effective workflow is like very clear role delineation, and then having visibility into those workflows to hold people accountable, to make process improvements when there's breakdowns. I think one like misconception is that like building workflows is a one and done thing. No, these are like a living, breathing piece of your business, and they need to be regularly audited. You need to have somebody on your team that owns your workflows. It happens in my team right now. It's like, hey, this moves too fast. This moves too slow. I continue to have questions at this same phase. We need to have more information. This is convoluted. Nobody's using it. Well, it's probably too complex. You need to back it out and simplify it. Like there should be some wiggle room here with the workflows, to ensure that they are reflective of your actual process, to ensure that they're simple and easy to follow to use. Because that's where the biggest, like, when people say, oh, you know, my advisors are never going to use workflows, like, yeah, because they're freaking complicated. You guys made them way too difficult. You need to scale this back and simplify it so that they're easy to use. And that's really where you see the positive impact and the I think my favorite thing about workflows is just the amount of capacity that it gives to teams to free them up to be spending time doing the high value stuff. But in order for them to be effective, they have to be simple.
Sure. Yeah. And let's continue going down that kind of path there of capacity and
Mhm.
really talking about, okay, we understand that we have these limitations or these workflows set up maybe in an incorrect way. So how would you say that firms can now use that data to uncover that capacity, identify inefficiencies, improve
Mhm.
operations? What are some of those ways that we can actually do that?
Yeah. And so I'm going to kind of geek out on this for a second. Michael Kitces has these really great key performance indicators that he recommends every firm track to measure the overall health and wellness of your business. I hinted at this earlier: revenue per client, advisor, and employee. And so those are really key metrics to recognize where there are gaps, where there's people to protect, and where there's opportunity to improve systems and processes to create capacity so that we're doing more of the high value stuff to watch those numbers naturally improve. But I think so once you have clear metrics that you're tracking against, I think it's easy to identify where there are those gaps, and then just ensuring that the right people are doing the right things, that you don't have advisors bogged down in administrative tasks, and you don't have, you know, there everybody has their marching orders. Everybody knows exactly what's expected of them. It's articulated in a workflow, which essentially is just a checklist that tells us exactly how to execute on all of the various things that we're doing on the day to day. That there's very clear ownership, so that you can see, you know, what's in progress, how long are things taking, who owns each step, you know, who's overloaded, who's underloaded, like where, you know, making sure that the workload is even and that everybody is focused on what is the highest and best use of their time.
Yeah, certainly. And I know we were just kind of talking about that visibility into those
Mm,
workflows and into task ownership. Um, so we talked about having the visibility, but
yeah.
what are some of the ways that actually having that visibility can keep us be aligned and productive? Like from my
Mhm.
perspective, something that I talk about a lot with firms is making sure that no one is overwhelmed. Like you had mentioned,
Right,
advisors don't have these administrative tasks that are sitting there while they're in
right.
meetings with advisors. But can we expand on that a little bit? What are some of the benefits of actually having those views set up and having that visibility?
Yeah, for sure. So, visibility and ownership are really the foundation of a well-run operating system. You and I both know that, and
Mhm.
I had hinted at this at the beginning of the conversation, um, that you can't make the decisions. Like if you tell me, Kate, I'm overwhelmed. It's like, okay, good. I need data. I need data to support why you feel overwhelmed. And so having those KPIs in place will help me understand, why does Chris feel so overwhelmed? Oh, because he's a lead advisor and he's doing freaking paperwork. Like, no wonder he's overwhelmed. He's not doing the high value stuff. And so we need to get very clear on, who's responsible for what. Leaders can then see where things stand without having to like chase updates. And I know we're going to get into like how to look at this in Wealthbox, but previously, it was like running various reports. It was like having to configure it in Excel to be able to make business decisions based on the information that was in the CRM. You guys have made it infinitely easier now, and I know we'll get into that. But the whole point is that work moves forward consistently, and it removes a lot of like the back and forth day-to-day friction that we had previously felt. And that's very hard to do without having easy access and visibility to the system. And that's really why I love your guys' dashboards.
Yeah, certainly. And speaking of that, and speaking of a couple other things that you had mentioned, you talked about those KPIs, those key performance
Yeah.
indicators, whether it's, revenue per client or revenue per advisor. What are some of the main benefits of tracking that KPI? How can the KPI tracking support more informed and proactive decision making across the entire firm?
Yeah, I love this question. Because naturally, when you're like, oh, Kate, I'm feeling so overwhelmed, it's like, okay, great, I got to get somebody to support Chris. Okay, that's our natural. Like we just need another person. And I am a firm believer in solving that overwhelm first with systems, processes, workflows, and technology before adding additional people, because adding additional people into the chaos only exacerbates the chaos. And so the value of leveraging KPIs to track this stuff is to put data with how you're feeling. And I think they really give you an early warning sign. So instead of like waiting until something breaks, you can see these trends developing and step in sooner. So it's really, the most important thing is to keep it really simple. Track, the metrics that reflect exactly how your business needs to run, and not just the outcomes. So when you do that consistently, the decision making becomes a whole lot more straightforward, and we're not basing it on emotion. We actually have like numbers to support the way you're feeling.
Yeah, definitely does make sense. And there's a lot. There's a lot that we're talking about here. There's a lot of different ways that we could gain that insight into the data that we have in the CRM. So before we actually get into some of those specific capabilities in Wealthbox that allow you to do these things, I wanted to kind of revisit what you mentioned at the very beginning when you had given us kind of a little bit of background on Simplicity Ops, right?
Sure.
Simplicity Ops partnering with advisors that are using Wealthbox from the operational perspective. So tell us, how does Simplicity Ops help firms identify these operational gaps and optimize performance using CRM data? What are you all able to do for advisors?
Yeah, good question. So we're really big geeks about the data, and we have the way I guess I'll frame it is like we help firms take what you guys already have and make it usable. And so we start every engagement with an operational assessment, and I mean, kind of like the way you financial advisors are operating. We do a deep dive into figure out what you're doing well, what's not going so well, and then we put together a plan of action for like what I would do if I were you to do things better. And so we focus on the CRM very heavily initially to identify like, where's their redundancy? Where's their duplicative work? Why do you feel overwhelmed? We talk to advisors like, oh, the office feels like chaos. I feel like we have all this great technology, but it feels disjointed. Like I want to put data with why people feel that way. And we put together a really beautiful dashboard explaining like, here's what you're doing well. Here's what you're not doing so well. Here's some of the regulatory required things that you guys are missing. Here are, here's why the team feels like things are slow. This is why you're missing new opportunities. Here's where the breakdowns are. Then my team and I review all of that together, and we put together a plan of action like, hey, Chris, if I were you, here's what I would do to do things better. Here's how I would structure your data. Here's the templates I would incorporate. Here's the task templates I would incorporate, emails, workflows, and some other, at the end of the day, Wealthbox is just a CRM. It can't be all the things. And in order to create a really well-rounded, streamlined system, we have to integrate some other key pieces of technology. And so we basically explain to you, here's what it looks like today, here's what it could look like in the future. And then, if we decide to work together, we track against those KPIs to show improvement by leveraging technology.
Sure, sure, yeah. So now let's get into a little bit of Wealthbox, and kind of get into the mind of Kate during these conversations that you have with advisors.
Sure.
You provide these recommendations, right, of what
Mhm.
should be used in Wealthbox. So we'll get a little bit of a little bit of a free trial, so to speak, of Simplicity Ops here by asking you, how can advisors track key revenue and operational indicators directly in Wealthbox? What is your suggestion? What are some of the tools that we should be using?
Yeah, so tracking things like revenue generating activities, leveraging Wealthbox as your sales pipeline to understand where new revenue opportunities are coming from, who's responsible for bringing in the new revenue opportunities, show revenue opportunities moving up the pipeline, whether they're from, a brand new prospect off the street to a new revenue opportunity for an existing client. I'm a big fan of leveraging Wealthbox to be able to track all of those indicators. I think defining what matters first and then building dashboards and workflows to surface these things and these metrics with regular review is a great place to start. I know we're going to get into the dashboards in a second, but I think those dashboards are really helpful in identifying who our highest value relationships are, making sure we're prioritizing those high value relationships, making sure we have a service model in place that protects, our highest value relationships from subsidizing our bottom tier relationships. Am I geeking out too hard on this? I said it at the beginning, but everybody thinks of Wealthbox as being like a client relationship management tool. And I like to think of Wealthbox as a business management tool.
Yeah, certainly. So the opportunity tracking,
Yeah,
revenue tracking on the individual contact, those are very important. So,
absolutely.
tracking that revenue and operational indicators. Let's pivot over to more of the operational productivity, right? So how does workflow visibility and task ownership in Wealthbox help keep work moving efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece is accountability, and with accountability comes momentum. One of the biggest breakdowns I see most often is, well, we've got all these fancy workflows, we've got all this technology, but nobody uses it, and it's because they don't have an accountability partner or somebody to keep them honest to the system. And so, when every task has a clear owner, you can see where it sits in the workflow, so work doesn't get lost. There's much more proactive follow up. It's very easy to reassign things. I think one of the single greatest values of leveraging workflows, especially when you're working on a team, is being able to pick up where somebody else left off. I have a very core team member on my team right now who is out due to an unexpected illness, and my life has been infinitely easier because we practice what we preach. We have technologies in place so I can see where she's at on every client engagement. And so that allows us to keep things moving forward and not stumble over ourselves, when we do have a gap in personnel. Um, I also think, kind of going back to the question that you just had, I think if we go back to thinking about the key performance indicators as it relates to revenue per client, advisor, and employee, those metrics can very easily be tracked in Wealthbox as long as we have a very clear contact hierarchy with types indicating who our clients are, that the client count is accurate. You would be shocked how many databases I get into, and the household count and the client count are wildly inaccurate. We can't track those metrics as long as that data is disorganized. And so, foundationally, I don't want to skip the fact that in order for any of this fancy stuff that you and I are talking about to work, you have to have a very strong foundational support starting with the data. And so I think all of this is fine and dandy, and I'm really excited to get into the dashboards, but I need everybody to focus first and foremost on the structure of the data to be able to export and talk about what we're talking about. And that's one other takeaway, Chris, that I'm going to give everybody today is our style guide that articulates the contact hierarchy and how to think about creating the framework so that you can run reports based off of this information and track workflows and make sure that we're doing the high value stuff. So I don't want to skip over the fact that you've got to do some of the basics first before any of this stuff is effective.
Yeah, definitely would agree, and I'll definitely echo that, because the entire conversation that we're having here, and it was even framed as, your CRM is a database, but it could be more by
For
tracking
sure.
your business decisions. But there's that expectation that your data in the
Mhm.
database is accurate. So that's another very important key part of this, and something that I talk about all the time. I know this is the next thing I wanted to get into, is some of those dashboards and
Please.
reporting on these things. Um, but you could leverage those same features to ensure data integrity. And that's something that I'll talk about as well when I actually get into sharing my screen a bit. But let's actually talk a little bit more about that from your perspective, Kate. How can firms build those KPI dashboards in Wealthbox to monitor performance and support growth? What are some of the kind of go-to rules of thumb of how can I actually leverage the data that's there and view it in my reports and dashboards?
Um, I always take the perspective of start small and keep it simple. One of like we love the KISS acronym. We come back to that all the time. When things are hard to adopt or hard to understand or we're starting to feel frustrated, it's generally because we've over-engineered something and we've made it overly complex. So identify a few of the, the key metrics that you need to track first. I think you need to know like where I think you need to audit your team and understand where they feel like there's gaps or where there's friction and aim to solve those first. And then build dashboards that make those visible all in one place. The goal is not to be able to track everything. It's to create something that you'll actually review and use regularly. Think like, your Monday morning team huddle or whatever. And the reason why I love this so much is like prior to your dashboard capabilities, we used to like run all these exports and like put it into Excel and like reconfigure it so that we could like actually see what we were looking at to make it usable to like guide a conversation with the team and make decisions. I just find that your guys' dashboarding system now makes that so much easier. But like from a business management standpoint, I just want to see in one place the overall health and wellness of my business, which means what are people working on? Where are things hung up? Why are they hung up? And if it's like, oh, we were expecting a rollover from the Jones family. Why hasn't that money landed yet? Okay, that used to live like 10 clicks deep. That's been flushed to the surface now. We can very easily see, oh, well, the Joneses are in London for 2 weeks, right? We can see in their workflow, there's a note in there that says the Joneses are in London for 2 weeks. They'll get back to us and sign paperwork when they return from their trip. I want to have that level of visibility across the entire business so that we can keep things moving. Or if it's hung up unnecessarily because it's assigned to you, Chris, and you're not in that role anymore, we need to address that immediately so that doesn't hang up there, especially revenue generating opportunities, right?
Yeah, certainly. And there's another aspect of this. Yes, getting visibility into these key data points from a reporting perspective is critical. But when you are setting up the accountability correctly,
Absolutely.
there's almost a layer of trust that is built where you trust your CRM to keep everyone accountable so that you don't have to sit down and think, wait, where was that rollover? Why didn't that go through? You can trust that the workflow would have taken you through the process and reminded you to do everything that you do. So as long as it's not overdue, we're on track. Something is happening. The workflow reminded us to follow up to let them know all the different parts there.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's a perfect example. And I hinted at this earlier, but I think we should really drive this point home about trust. Ain't nobody trusting a workflow if the Jones family address is wrong, or it shows that they're married and they're not, or it shows incorrect employer information, or heaven forbid their email or whatever. Like that, a couple of those just completely erodes the trust in the entire system, and your workflows are not going to be effective. None of the other technology that we're integrate is going to be effective because if the team can't trust the foundational component, which we now know is the data, nobody. This is when people struggle with adoption. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that and ensure like everyone's like, okay, this all sounds really fine and dandy, but like, where do I start first? Well, unfortunately, you have to start by structuring your data, making sure it's clean and consistent, making sure everybody knows how we're going to handle the data component first, and then you can start building upon that foundation. I think about this and the way we approach it with our clients is like building a house. We're going to lay a super solid foundation first before we put up the frame and the roof, because if we put up the frame and the roof first on a faulty foundation, eventually the structure is going to collapse. And I see the same thing in CRMs. It's kind of a silly analogy, but it works.
Yeah, definitely does. All right, so let's get into it. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Cool.
I want to revisit some of these features that we've been talking about. Again, with the really important backbone to everything that we're talking about here is having that clean data, and I'll talk about how we could utilize some of these features for that clean data. But one of the first things that you had talked about, Kate, is tracking that revenue, and that revenue could be tracked in two different kind of stages of their life, right? It could be a potential client or a potential new line of business where you
Yep.
track an opportunity, or it could be on the client already. So let's talk about those two things. In Wealthbox, you have opportunities. That is your sales tool. That's where you track that potential new line of business. In each opportunity, you have a dollar amount. That's exactly where we're going to be feeding that potential revenue from, is those opportunities. We can take it even deeper by tracking the probability percentage and only focus on ones that have a higher probability than 50%, for instance, or based on when they're set to close. There's a target close date here as well. And the great part about these opportunities is that they are all following a process here. There is the pipeline aspect of this, which coincidentally is also what this view is called, where we have the stages that represent that sales process. So we can truly know which types of opportunities, where they are, which ones will be more dependable than others to know what business is coming in. And each of these are, of course, related to the individual contact. So you'll know exactly which prospect or client it is that we're working with. But tracking your opportunities is imperative to ensuring that you get the big picture. I always recommend to everyone that I speak with that you're creating opportunities. The end goal of an opportunity is that you mark it as close won or close loss. You have this simple drag and drop function, and you label it as an opportunity that you won or an opportunity that you lost. So let's fast forward a little bit and look at the tail end of this. Not only am I able to see how is our book of business growing, but I'm also able to leverage the opportunities that I lost to know who should I reach back out to, because this month is a little slower. It's the holidays. Let's reach out to some folks that have shared some interest in the past. So running that closed lost report, knowing who you can possibly bring back in by having additional conversations with them, that's critical. So if you get a call from someone and they're asking you some basic questions about what you're able to offer them, by the end of the call, they say, no, thank you. Create that as an opportunity. Market as closed loss right away. You'll benefit from that in the long term of having those reports, those dashboards that shows you where is that new business coming in. And let's talk about the other side of the coin here, revenue for existing clients, which we could then leverage and track on a per advisor basis, on a per team basis, if we prefer that. On your contact in Wealthbox, there's a ton of fields that we could use to leverage that information. If you take a look at the additional info tab specifically, this is where you'll find details that really you'll be looking at maybe right before the annual review or in your reports on a regular basis. And in here, we are tracking things like their assets, their liabilities, their estimated net worth to know what is the total that I'm managing and what is that amount of money that I am responsible for, essentially. We could, of course, take this to a kind of a different perspective of reporting on opportunities brought in from a given client based on the advisor assigned, but we can track that revenue, that amount of money that we're managing, bringing in, or earning in a lot of different ways. And outside of this, this kind of pivots a little bit into some of that data integrity aspect, but custom fields in Wealthbox are very, very useful. You can create custom fields that are simple date fields and text fields. But you could also create custom fields as a dollar amount, which you can calculate on within your reports, and you could see that big picture. And I'm very excited for you all to receive Kate's style guide. That's something that talks about a lot of this, of how are others managing their client data and how you should maybe consider managing that client data. So that's the opportunity, the kind of revenue side of the business that'll allow you to track your KPIs. And we'll talk about how we're tracking those KPIs in a little bit. Let's talk about the accountability factor, accountability of tasks, of workflows. Where are we with these individual items? Now, when you are creating tasks or workflows, they're always going to have an assigned individual. There's always going to be someone that is responsible for completing those tasks. And it's always going to be pre-designed or predefined to be assigned to you. And you could switch that to a different individual, a team, if it could be picked up by any one of multiple people. Or when we're talking about templates and standardization, we can point that to a role, an individual that fills a specific responsibility for a given client. But then when we have these tasks assigned, workflow steps assigned, and they're outstanding, not only does your homepage, your homepage, show you your responsibilities, but we're able to then view that in the entire tasks view, open up the view and see everyone's responsibilities to see where are all of our overdue items. Why aren't we completing them? Oh, that's right. Bonnie is out sick. Let me help out Bonnie with some of her responsibilities, or Bonnie is the client in this case, Julie, as the example. I could dive a little deeper and say, okay, Julie, let's see what you have going on. Okay, there's 2 overdue tasks. I can pick up where you left off. Kate, you pointed this out earlier as well. Just the ability for someone else to be able to go in, see what's happening, and help out. Then we talk about kind of pivoting back over to that client metric, client data perspective of making sure that you are tracking your opportunities and that you are filling in that estimated net worth field and that you're tracking those details. But then we get into client hierarchy, right? And Kate, you had spent a little bit of time talking about that as well, and that's a big part of the style guide. So really, I'm excited for you all to take a look at that. How should you be segmenting clients? How should you be labeling your clients? In Wealthbox, we have a default field called the contact type. That is the largest level. Who are you? Then we get a little bit deeper of understanding in which bucket of my book of business do you fall into? Are you an A-list client or a B-list client? Whether you track that as a tag at the very top, or if you track that as a custom field to track the tier of your client or the segmentation or category, if that's how you label it, it's important to have these labels so that the reports at the end of the day give you exactly what you're looking for. And then we have that kind of basic.
Can I piggyback on
Yeah,
something you just said right there? Because
yeah,
I
go
think this
ahead.
is a perfect opportunity. I saw some of the questions in the box about how to actually use Wealthbox to track some of these things, and you just nailed a key piece about the contact hierarchy. I'll send this as a resource too, is creating a service matrix and tying that to what Chris is talking about, the segmentation of your contacts. And so when you think about tiering your contacts, I call them tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, whatever you want to call them. We differentiate the tiers based on the 3 A's: AUM, advocacy, and attitude. And so you need to qualify these folks based on those components. And then we're going to tie. That's how then we can tie the revenue to the contact record in Wealthbox and track some of these key performance indicators that we're talking about. You need to have that level of discernment and organization, like Chris is talking about, in the database to make any of the rest of this possible.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a segmentation, there's that grouping of your clients, but even getting into the personal labels and details of your clients, such as householding clients and keeping those household titles accurate, right? Ensuring that your head of household is your main point of contact. That's who I'm always reaching out to first, knowing who the spouse is, knowing who the children are, so that you can, for one, see who you're working with, but then also leverage that in your reports and know that these are all of my points of contact at these households. These are the individuals that I'm reaching out to. And that's where I'm looking at different activities that I might be tracking. Consistency is really key here, of making sure that if you're using a certain label, that's the label that you're using for all of those clients, so that you get that accuracy in your reports. So let's now actually talk about the output of this data, of all this information that we're tracking. And Kate, you had talked about dashboards a couple times. Before talking about dashboards, we have to talk about reports. That's what dashboards are built on. So let's quickly talk about reports. Reports in Wealthbox are fully customizable, and they are based on CRM data. Any data that you enter into Wealthbox, you can then report on. We do provide you with a lot of sample reports. You'll find a lot of great best practices around all different webinars that are hosted, or checking out some of the resources that Kate puts out. If you do not follow Kate on LinkedIn, you definitely should. There's a lot of great resources there. And when you start building out these reports, you're kind of starting with a blank slate of what are you looking for. So if you are wanting to track those opportunities, for instance, you would change the object of the actual report to opportunities, and we'd specify only show me my own. I could set assigned to is Brad Creedon, that's who I'm signed in as, and only show me ones that are maybe in a specific stage, or maybe that have a probability greater than a certain amount. So you can really pick and choose what is important to you to view in that data. And then we choose our display fields of what do I actually want to see about those opportunities. We could group our results, and in the results, we can add charts and graphs for better visibility. But I always like to start by talking about what a report consists of. And then I like to mention that you don't need to know any of this because of the AI for reports function. That'll take you 95% of the way there. You want to specify what you want to see. I could click in here and use plain English to specify, show me opportunities assigned to me that are not closed, that have a probability of over 50%. Super simple. I'll hit generate, and that's going to build that report for me. I don't need to click through the fields. I could just say what I'm wanting to see in that specific report that I then roll up into a dashboard. So it does its thing. It's looking through all the possible fields, and it's going to build it out for me. There it is. It made sure that the object is set to opportunities. Assigned to is report viewer, which is interesting because that's a dynamic report now, meaning if I run it, I'll see my opportunities. If you run it, you'll see your opportunities. So from a scalability perspective, this is huge. Stage is not lost, right? So it's letting me know that it's only opportunities that are active or not, or one in this case, which this is something that I'll revisit here in a second. Probability is greater than 50%. You might have noticed I mentioned that I want opportunities that are not closed. That doesn't necessarily mean not close loss, right? That also means not close one. AI isn't always accurate. So really the point here that I'm trying to drive home is that you should be reading through anything that is AI generated. And in this scenario, this is not accurate for me. I'll actually just change that over to closed at is empty. That is always going to be the most consistent label that I can use. And here's my report. That 95% of the way there built out the report for me. I just had to apply that 5% of reading through, updating one because maybe this AI model didn't get it right, and that report is ready for me. Common question, I'll mention it now. Can this AI model see my client data? No, it cannot. That's why it might get some of this wrong, because it only sees the fields that are there that it can pick through, and it knows Wealthbox reports. So that's reporting. So we're building out these different reports to pull certain data like revenue per advisor or revenue per client if we're looking for ones that are specifically related to a certain client. This is how we're building those different reports. When we look at the results of a report, it's still very much individualized. I have an example that I like to pull up, this investment management pipeline that already has some charts and graphs applied. This is a way to see that single data point, that report, and visualize it in different ways to really break it down into ways that work for me. We're still in the individual report. But then any of these reports that you build out, and again, these could be opportunity based, they could be based on contact, the data that's on those contacts, tasks that might be overdue, that might be high priority that need to get done today. You're building these reports, which you then pull up in a dashboard. And dashboards is really the key here. It's the ability to view all of these different metrics that matter to you all in one place. So along the same lines of revenue, right? We're talking about that revenue. I have a dashboard in here for projected revenue. So it's kind of looking forward, not necessarily backwards. But this is an example of how I could view these different metrics, these points of how much did I bring in Q1? How much did I bring in Q2? What's the current pipeline looking like? All of these are custom calculations of these different aspects of Wealthbox. So whether it is the revenue that you won or contacts based on their estimated net worth that you wanted to calculate to see the size of your book of business, these are different ways to view revenue, those dollar amounts that could be calculated for you. Pivoting into some other views here from the operations perspective, if we're looking at productivity or efficiency within the CRM, you can build out, and this is the great thing about dashboards, they're fully customizable. You could have just a master dashboard that has everything, or you could have these separate ones. You could build out an operations dashboard. And as you see here in this example, I have 38 overdue tasks, 6 that happen to be high priority. I could see who is assigned to the most. I could see that certain people might be overwhelmed, and that will prompt me to go in there and delegate that a little bit better. So you're able to view these different perspectives of tasks, workflows, notes that are being added, contacts that are being created, and know when you should be actually looking at that data. And I'll take this time to mention, what do we do with this data, right? So you have this dashboard and it's showing me, yeah, there's 6 high priority overdue tasks. What now? So again, this is based on reports. So each one of these widgets is built on a specific report. So all I have to do is click the 3 dots, go into the report, and here's my 6 high priority overdue tasks. Not only am I seeing the data, but this is an interactive spreadsheet. So I could click on the task and I could go in here and delegate it to someone else, push out my due date. I could work on it and complete it if I needed to, but it's the dashboards are actionable. You can actually take those dashboards and follow through on what needs to be done. And then from the data integrity perspective, I always love talking about this dashboard. I'm sure, Kate, this is something that you talk about as well. Just ensuring that you have certain data in the CRM really ensures that your foundation is correct, that you're not then searching for that data when you're in the middle of a workflow, you need to call someone and you don't have a phone number for them. Why not? So I have this service dashboard that I have in this demo environment that I always like to point out that essentially shows you which of your contacts don't have a phone number on file, don't have an address or an email on file. This is the type of dashboard that you could look at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And if any of these are ever not zero, they need your attention. You need to go in there, go into that report, see who you don't have a phone number for. Oh, here's Kennedy. I actually just spoke with Kennedy the other day. I have her phone number right here. I go into edit. Oh, while I'm still in the report, type in that phone number, save that contact, and that's all I have to do. Now, when I close this out and I refresh my dashboard, that 2 drops down to a 1. So it's this that allows for the other aspects of the CRM, the progress tracking with workflows, revenue tracking with opportunities. The data needs to be there for you to report on it. And these kinds of service dashboards and reports help you with that as well. Kate, before I open it up for questions, any other thoughts or comments on what I've covered here?
No, you did great. You've answered a lot of the questions. People asking about, like what are the most common dashboards? You nailed it. It basically flushes all of those reports to the surface now so you can see them very easily. And I hinted at this at the beginning of the conversation, but like it's not good enough to just build this system one time and forget about it. You have to have this ongoing audit. And this makes the auditing process so easy. And so to ensure consistency, to ensure, trustworthiness, these from an operations standpoint, this especially is incredibly important and vital to the ongoing success of the business. As soon as these numbers, these numbers are what erode the trust. And so what we do, like when we build a system, it starts as like a weekly audit, then it becomes a monthly audit, and then it's like quarterly. Everybody gets really good at managing the data eventually, but there still needs to be a level of accountability here to make sure that everything's accurate.
Yeah, certainly. The amount of times I've tried working on a personal level with an advisor, where
Yeah.
the second they ask me for a phone number for the 3rd time, I just stop responding.
Right.
If you don't have my phone number by now, right? And this is going to prevent that. Awesome. So let's get into some questions. Some great questions have been coming in here. If you do have any questions, click on that Q&A button down at the bottom, enter in your questions. We'll get through as many as we can. I know that we have about 10 minutes left that was kind of set aside for this presentation. If we do not get to your question because we ran out of time or because it's a more advanced question, our teams will follow up with you. So just know that we will be pulling these questions and following up if we need to. If you just wanted to reach out, I'll pull up this follow-up contact slide here if you want to reach out to Wealthbox. If you're interested in learning more, on the left-hand side, you have sales@wealthbox.com, or you can scan the QR code to book a demo right away. Or if you wanted to reach out to Simplicity Ops, you can reach out on the right-hand side by scanning that QR code. Is that email supposed to be plural?
Yeah,
Okay.
simplicityops.com.
Let me just quickly update that just so everyone
Good
knows how to
catch.
reach out. There it is. Awesome. So reach out, info@simplicityops.com. Scan the QR code to talk with the team. Let's take a look at some questions. Kate, I know you've been going through some of these and reading them.
Yeah.
Anything that stands out to you?
Um, the KPI softwares. So, Michael, I'm a big Michael Kitces fan, and he just collaborated with somebody, and they have a KPI tool and benchmarking tool that I love. I think it's called Advisor Economics. Don't quote me on that. I will include it as part of my follow up. I'll include a link to it, but it's been really helpful to help us set some benchmarks and goals and track against that. So yeah, there's definitely external tools you can use, but it all comes from Wealthbox.
Perfect.
How
Thank
do you
you. I saw
determine
a
the max amount of
question.
clients? I don't know. Do you want to answer that, Chris? I have another
I
resource I can give everybody.
Yeah, I didn't read through the entire thing. I did see a couple other questions asking about which reports and dashboards to run to track KPIs. That question came in earlier, and I know that I did cover it. If you
Yeah,
wanted to learn more, reach out to the teams here by scanning the QR code. But let's see here. How do you determine the maximum number of clients that can be effectively supported based on number of staff? Curious what the tipping point is when new associates should be added. The premise is that the right people are doing the right tasks, but what if there are structural issues that aren't being addressed? Yeah, so I think there is no secret formula. I think, and Kate, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. But if, and Kate had pointed this out earlier, make sure you're being as efficient with the tools you have at your disposal before hiring additional individuals. You
agreed.
can be more efficient with the tools that you're using. So, as long as you are using the tools that you have at your disposal to their full potential, if at that point you're still not able to keep up, that's really when you hire the next person. That's when you look at growing your team. Because that really should be kind of in response to certain bottlenecks that you might have. And bottlenecks, I think, are inevitable. With that bottleneck is team size, right?
Agreed.
But you should be looking at how you're using your CRM, how you're using your marketing tools, and how you're using your custodial platforms. Those that should be step one before looking at how many people can I throw at these little things that my systems could do for me if I just use them a little bit more. Kate, anything to add to that?
No, I you nailed it, and I refer back to a KITSA study that he did with Eliza DePardo that I'll send everybody that is exactly about this, and how to think about when to add an additional team member. And up until maybe it was even the end of last year, it was for every $250,000 of new revenue you bring in, generally indicates a need to add an additional team member. And they take a leapfrog approach where it's like advisor support, advisor support, advisor support. But now with the rapid advancement of advisor technology, that $250,000 of new revenue number is now $325,000 of revenue. So with every $325,000 of new revenue that you bring into the business, generally indicates a need to add an additional team. I would argue that if you have really kick-ass systems and really streamlined workflows, that you could probably, push that to 350 or more. But I think of it less as how many households can you serve and more about how much revenue can you support. Because anyway, I'll send everybody a link to the webinar or the podcast and the chart that he put together. I think it's really helpful in thinking about in helping you think about how to think about adding additional team members.
Yeah, certainly. I saw another question here, and this question came up a little bit earlier, but the question is, how would you suggest to manage old and new leads? Currently, our database has a lot of leads that are old and should be disqualified, but others that are legit. How would you start this project and stop the bleeding with how we enter new leads? I think from my perspective, really hits on the labeling aspect, right?
Agreed.
Ensuring that you are using the different ways to label those leads. Apply a
Yeah.
tag to your cold leads so that they're still there if they ever revisit those conversations, but you're not actively marketing and prospecting out to those leads. Kate, anything else specifically to add to that?
I will send you our style guide. We've talked about this multiple times now, but there's a very clear delineation between how to label each different type of lead or prospect, or however you want to talk about it. But Chris is right. You don't delete anybody. They just need to be allocated appropriately so they fall off of your active list and they become inactive. But yet, if they ever raise their hand again in the future, you've still got, all the communication you've had with them, their contact information, who's who, so you don't look like a ding dong when you're, talking to them again for the first time in 10 years. But refer back to exactly what Chris is saying, the style guide and the contact structure.
Sure. Another question did come up. This is a fairly common question. In a given household, if we fill in the additional info for one contact, does it carry through to the spouse, or can you enter it at the household level? In Wealthbox, contacts are individual. They're individualized. The aggregation that happens between the individuals and the household of the activity stream. So if you're having conversations with one client and then another client, those activities will all show up on the household. Same thing happens in the other direction. If you add a note or an activity to the household, that is visible on all the individuals. None of the individual fields or the actual outstanding activities roll up in either direction because it is just one activity. The recommendation is consistency. I briefly mentioned this earlier. You have that label of who is the head of household. If you prefer to use the individual, use your head of household and then run your reports on all of your head of households. If you prefer to add that information on the household, which in Wealthbox, the individual will have additional fields that a household does not. If you use a household, use only your households. So really consistency is the key here because they are individualized contacts. Kate, I'm not sure if that question comes up for you from a recommendation perspective. What are your thoughts?
I answer it the exact same way. I don't really care. It's not a hill I'm willing to die on. All I care about is consistency. As
Right.
long as it's done consistently, you guys are going to win. But it needs to be done the same by every single person on your team. Otherwise, the reporting is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, certainly. Last question, and we'll close off with this question. Other questions have come up that I think my team will follow up with you on just to give you an even better answer. So if we didn't get to your question, you will hear from us. But the last question here, can dashboard widgets be placed on the home page? I'm thinking about if we want them to focus on a certain item. Yes, they can. There are different capabilities based on the plan that you are on. For instance, on the Premier plan, you have the ability to modify that home page for everyone on your team. So you could say, let's focus on these high priority overdue tasks for the entire team. If there's ever a high priority overdue item, everyone should see that. You can put that widget right there on the home page. Every time you go there, you will see that. On other plans that we do have, you have the ability to create multiple different layouts that you could apply to different departments, teams, or even individuals. But yes, you do have the ability to customize the layout of your homepage to include those widgets right there on the homepage. Awesome. Looks like that is all for the kind of generalized questions that we could go through here. Again, the Wealthbox team is going to reach out to anyone that might have had some Wealthbox specific questions. Look out for that follow-up email. Kate is sending a lot of resources, so look out for that email. That email is likely going to be the one that'll include the recording as well, so everything will be in one place. But thank you all so much for joining. Kate, it's always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. Fun as always.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks again, everyone. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye
See
now.
y'all.